I think, Ben, we're in your hands whenever you'd like to start the meeting, and I'll admit Andy as and when he turns up.
No problem at all. Thanks ever so much, Ian, and thanks for the introduction. So I'm Ben Hargreaves, Head of Crime and Criminal Justice for Dorset Police, but I'm not here today as a police officer. I'm here as chair of this ethics discussion. So what I'll do is, if I can just go through our other panelists, please, and we're going to be talking about the ethics of digital meetings and how we present ourselves in this cyber world that's been thrust upon us this last year. And I think it's one of those areas that's been really brought into sharp focus by some of the things that have happened, and I'm immediately drawn to the plight of poor Jackie Weaver and the Handforth Parish Council Zoom meeting, which I'm sure everybody saw, and of course other famous or viral images of mums rugby tackling children in the background whilst husbands were trying to give television interviews. So introduces a lot of complex issues, ethical and otherwise, that I'm sure we will discuss now. But if I can just go through the panelists, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and perhaps give your initial thoughts on the subject. So first, if I could come to Vanessa.
So hi there, it's nice to be back with you again this week. So my name is Vanessa Heaslip. I'm an Associate Professor and Deputy Head of Department of the Department of Nursing Science at Bournemouth University. So I've been a nurse for over 25 years, but the last 18 of those has been spent at the university. And really, it's quite interesting because we've had to move all of our teaching online. Unfortunately, we're not in a position, nor would we want to stop the education of nursing students due to a global pandemic, because if we did, suddenly within the next 2 to 3 years, we'll find that we've got a local and a national shortage of nurses. So we have had to move all of our teaching online, and it does invoke interesting debates, interesting issues around the ethics, many of which were homeschooling. Some of the younger students, I have to say, thought it was okay to join their lessons in their pajamas in their bed. And we've had lots of discussions around people not comfortable having their cameras on. So actually it's lovely to have lots of faces. Normally I'm teaching and I see one person who puts a camera on because other people are really uncomfortable with it. And some of the discussions I've been having with them is actually, I think some of the things we've learned from COVID is how to organise things differently, especially from a healthcare perspective. And a colleague and I, a few months ago, participated in a Department of Health and Social Care Science technical call around evidence on aging, science, technology and healthy living, actually on the basis of talking about technology. And what we were reflecting in our contribution to that is actually technology has a major contribution to play, especially in reducing social isolation for people that find it difficult to get out of the house because of ongoing health issues. So there is a huge potential there. And I think some of the other things that we've identified during COVID is fascinating, really, because we've really struggled in health and social care to shift, if you like, the use of technology but a global pandemic hits and suddenly all the barriers that we were facing have now been solved. And so actually there's a lot more e-health. And there was a big review called the Topol Review, which is really looking at the digital provision of healthcare. And really thinking about moving forward, we've got to ensure that the healthcare practitioners are equipped to be able to work in this digital age. Because who necessarily wants to sit in an outpatient's department, maybe travel 2 hours to get to an outpatient's department if you're living more rurally, to sit there for an hour, maybe to see somebody once to be discharged, when actually you could do it from the comfort of your own home via a Skype or a video link. And so actually, I think we're not going to go back. And that's a lot of the discussions I've been having with students is it's nursing, but not as we know it. Because I said, moving forward, you're going to have to be able to present yourself online because we may have lots more telecommunications online. There are challenges. And those are around connectivity issues, around access. So not all areas have the same Wi-Fi network. There is also costs associated that. If we're going to make more healthcare delivered online, should our Wi-Fi be free? And there's lots of discussions around using 5G in Dorset with the Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group. We have to recognise that lots of people don't have hardware. We can't assume that everybody's got a computer or a smartphone. And so actually we could broaden a digital divide. And we saw a lot of that in COVID, especially with some younger people in families that are struggling, that actually found themselves even further behind because they didn't have access to computers. And those that do have access to computers, do they know how to use them? So, you know, very quickly, I've had to learn over the pandemic to use Teams, which is something that we've not used before. So we can't assume that everybody's got that technical ability. So how are we going to be upskilling those individuals? And then there are some issues around who's going to hold the data, who's going to monitor the data. People are worried about people knowing more about them than they want people to know. And so there are huge issues that we need to discuss and debate at a local level, but also a national level to improve communication. So I'm gonna end by saying I think it has massive potential, especially to connect people, but it has to be done in a way that's humanized. It's got to be done in a way that embraces human beings. Does that make sense? And that connectivity that's so important, that what we've missed because of COVID. And I think there's still quite a bit of way that we need to go on that.
That's a great opening. Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that. And I'm sure we'll come back to a couple of those points. Can I move us on to Andrew, please, next?
Thank you, Ben. I'm one of the Catholic priests at Sacred Heart Church on Richmond Hill. I'm also university chaplain, so it's nice to see you, Vanessa, and I hope I can get to meet you in the university soon. I'm going to offer one particular approach to it, and I'm going to say at the outset that I'm going to offer a digital skeptic approach. Having said that, I'm appearing right now on a digital forum, and we've been using online worship during the pandemic. So we've got web cameras in our church, and we broadcast our services every day. We did that before the pandemic, actually. And people have emailed us to say how much they've appreciated being able to watch our masses, for example, online. But I know that that's not the same as worship in person. People tell me that too. But I also know, just from what the church teaches, that for example, I can't bless something that's on the other end of a computer screen, or that I can only see through a computer screen. I can't hear someone's confession over the internet or give them absolution. I can't give someone communion over the internet. I can't celebrate a wedding if all the parties aren't present right here with me. It's a very restricted thing. Why is that? I think it's because there's something different about being present with people from engaging digitally. I think that some of the negative aspects of the digital medium and the digital environment are traceable to that difference. So I've come up with 3 specific negatives about digital interaction. The first one is objectification. So I think part of the reason why people felt so free to verbally abuse Jackie Weaver, shall we say, or perhaps to write bad things about her online or whatever, was because she didn't seem real enough to them. That she was just a character appearing on a screen, a 2-dimensional image. Perhaps if they'd been in a room with her, they wouldn't have said those things to her or wouldn't have spoken to her in that way. I think that goes for lots and lots of different kinds of digital interaction, but especially comments on articles about people, whether they're famous people or people who just happen to be in the news for one reason or another. I think it goes for the way in which celebrities are trolled, and the ways in which ordinary people are stalked and cyberbullied. I think it happens because of objectification. The second problem I think that we have with it is what I call decontextualization. So on the internet, things can become taken completely out of context. I heard Bishop Richard Harries on the radio recently talking about the effect on teenage girls of seeing idealized images of women on the internet. These images are completely taken out of context for them. They simply consume one image after the other, and it has a devastating impact on their mental health and their own image of themselves. And then finally, that leads on to the third problem that I see with it, which is alienation, whereby the person who interacts predominantly digitally can become alienated from themselves, can, in other words, live in a virtual reality, which is no reality at all. Sometimes when talking to Christian groups, I talk about a sort of sea of reality in which the emotions and the instincts, the animal instinct part of us, is a little bit like the waves of the sea, which is constantly changing and shifting. And so we find our feelings, we find the answer to the question, how do I feel, quite near the surface of the sea. But if we go a bit deeper than that, we find that there are other questions we can ask with deeper answers. What do I want, for example, is a deeper question than how do I feel? And what do I know is a deeper question still than what do I want or how do I feel? And deepest of all, as a Christian, at the deepest level of the ocean of reality, I find the reality that God knows me, that I am a child of God. And if I allow that deepest reality to inform what I know, and what I know to inform what I want, and what I want to inform how I feel, then I put my soul in the right order, I hope. Whereas if I begin from a place outside the sea of reality completely, at a level removed from even my emotions and my feelings, at a level which belongs in the digital world, which isn't part of my soul at all, the problem is that feeds into my feelings, and often in a negative way, and from there into my desires, and so forth, and upends and distorts my understanding of myself, and as a Christian, I believe, my vision of God. So that's my beginning, my opening statement for what it's worth.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. And in a minute, I'll come back to some of these issues around human connection, because I think you've tapped into a really interesting line of discussion there. But first, let's come to Paul.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, some really interesting points there, Andrew. I'd like to come back to you on things like what would the pandemic lockdown have been like without video conferencing and digital meetings for lots of people. I think it's been hugely positive. But let me just say, from a business perspective, some of the things that have been utterly transformational. I think that in terms of being able to do business, we are able to do business, and it has kept the economy going because of digital meetings. So for me, it's been not only a good thing, but it's potentially a revolutionary device, because, you know, both from a perspective of how we do business and where we do business, and as much as it quickly dawned on us that we continue to have meetings, we continue to do business, and that meant it changed business fundamentally. It meant that we could now, our opportunities grew overnight. We didn't need to be necessarily trapped within a regional model. If we could have meetings with people anywhere in the world or anywhere in the country, and effectively teleport there immediately, have the meeting like we're doing now, and be a whole lot more productive about it as well. And business has found that process of doing business this way will probably continue beyond the lockdown. So because 75% of sales organizations find it better, or at least as good or better. And 80% of people who buy things prefer to interact with the salespeople in this manner as well. And excuse me a moment, I just had a 4-year-old visit me for a moment there. So I think that that's one area of revolution. I think that it also brings the potential for flexible working, and that's fantastic for a lot of people. It's it's divisive for a lot of people. It's the worst thing that ever happened to them, particularly if they're stuck in a bed with a small child or something. But it does give the opportunity for people who want to work in quiet and without travel to do that. I think, and a spin-off of that is the lack. We're obviously reducing pollution, both in terms of the stuff that's in the air, but also the noise as well, which is great. The world is a quieter and cleaner place because of these things. It's going to change things dramatically in terms of employment, like I say, in terms of where we can employ people. So we need to be really mindful of the ethical dilemma that brings about, should we be focused, historically, one of the things that I was always very proud of was that I was helping Dorset businesses and regional businesses promote themselves and creating jobs and opportunity locally. Many people in my industry are now looking at, well, where do you recruit when actually, if we can all work wherever we need to be, there is a danger we'll recruit from the cheapest postcode sector in the world, where those skills exist. And what is the ethics of that in terms of should we be recruiting English people, or should we now just be recruiting English speaking people, perhaps in the cheapest places we can get the skills? That's an interesting one. I think business has evolved 5 years and 12 months in that respect, and it's been a fascinating journey. I think that the ethics of recording and distributing meetings are what we should be questioning, rather than the ethics of the meeting. If you're going to record a meeting, you have to be utterly explicit about it, and you have to say what you're going to do with it. And everybody has to be bought into that. To record a meeting without making the fact that you're recording it public, but also the fact that who's got access to that recording, what could they do with it, is the thing that results in this trolling, which is, I would argue, an anonymous activity carried out where people can hide behind handles and things rather than actual identities. And I think that it's been interesting what's happened in schools as well. I've spoken to lots of teachers who said, when the kids come back into the class, they've lost a lot of their technical capabilities that were actually really good teaching tools that they can't use. And that brings this, it's into some interesting questions. Actually, how do you get the most out of using that, doing teaching? Would blending it work better? I don't know. So I think there's an awful lot of issues there to discuss, really. But like I say, I think it's doing a lot of good. A huge amount of good, and the fact that our economy continues to function at all is only because of digital meetings. I think without it, we would absolutely, our mental health would have gone down the pan collectively. Our businesses and our economies would have failed, and so ethically, I think they're fundamentally a good tool and a useful one if we use them right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. So I think that Vanessa's described an adaptation to digital meetings. Andrew has talked about the human connection part, and Paul has sort of summed up some of the issues that it's the best alternative if the alternative was to do nothing or not have the meetings. But what I'd really like to explore with all three panelists is our understanding of the human connection. So it seems to be that there is something going on when we are present with another person or more than one person that perhaps doesn't exist over a digital connection. And this may be something that divides opinion. But has this video conferencing revolution, if we call it that, broadened our understanding of what it means to be present with somebody? Or does it raise more questions? So Vanessa, I don't know if I could start with you.
I think it's really interesting, and I say this as a woman who's 46 years of age, but actually I look at my children and we talk about connections. Younger people really connect over a digital platform. My son has most of his connections over a digital world, and I don't profess to understand it. It's not something that I would choose personally. I like to be with people, but I think we can't always assume that just because you're connecting digitally, you're not actually connecting. And I agree with what Andrew said around the distance and the trolling, but actually I think people are always going to have said things. They're just saying them in a public domain rather than a private domain. I think sometimes there are benefits of having a bit of distance in your connection, to actually feel a bit safe within that. So if you're talking around some issues, for example, of mental health, it's interesting. You look at lots of therapists. You asked them a year ago, would have said we could never do therapy unless it's face to face. But actually have done therapy over a digital connection over the last year and found it to be equally as beneficial. So I think it does depend. I think there is definitely a generational divide. I find it easy if I'm going to talk to my son about anything sensitive. Actually, I don't try and do it face to face. I do it via text. He's much more comfortable than via text, having some very private conversations, challenging conversations, but we're still connecting. So for me, I think connection is how you interact with that other person, how you feel a sense of connection with that other person. And I think the rest of it is just mechanisms of connecting.
Great, thank you. Andrew.
So I've been listening carefully to some of the positives that have been put forward here, economic and human, social, medical, psychological. I think it's undeniable there are positives there. I think what worries me about the idea that any person, any group of people, section of the population, Vanessa mentioned young people, but it could be any group, is engaging predominantly digitally with other people, is the capacity for that to descend into a fantasy, for it to stop being grounded in reality. I suppose there's a much greater potential for trying to reinvent yourself as someone you're not in order to fit in, if that's going on digitally, than there is if you are really meeting people face to face. And I worry that for some people can turn into a fantasy world which replaces reality for them. It's a concern I have, but I'm happy to be for other people to take other views and to say that that's not their experience.
Thanks, Andrew. And Paul, finally.
Sorry, Ben, can you reframe the question for me? Just rephrase the question, right?
Yes, it's the our understanding of the differences, perhaps, of the human connection. So the physical presence. What does it mean to be physically present with somebody against meeting over a digital connection? So is there something that we are missing, or that perhaps we've overstated through this discussion about digital?
Got it. Thanks. I was listening with interest to some of the responses, but what I just wanted to say was that obviously, if you're a grandparent, video conferencing your grandchildren rather than hugging them sucks. And I want to be able to be. There is a physical element to being with people, where shaking hands and hugging people, if you're a kinesthetic kind of person, and that's important to you, the world is a very different place when you're having digital meetings. So if you look at it from the perspective of those people, digital meetings are incredibly frustrating, and it's probably not good for people who smell shouldn't ordinarily be part of it, but I had somebody say to me the other day, I'm ashamed you're not coming around, Paul. I really like your cologne. I like it when you come around because you wear nice cologne and things like that. So it's just small things about meetings that could be that are missing. Yes, what are we really missing? We're missing the whole body language. So I have to put my hands up here for you to see that I'm waving my hands around rather than me down here. So you're missing some of the body language. You're not missing it all. They say 80% of what we say isn't the words we choose, but the intonation which we're getting and the body language which we're getting some of, which is interesting. But you can't tell whether my arms are folded or whether I'm wearing or whether I'm waving them around right now. So there's a bit of the context of everything I say that is missing. So there is that. So I think that fundamentally there is always going to be something missing from a digital meeting. Absolutely. And do I want to carry on digital meetings with my grandchildren? Absolutely not. I want to pick them up and give them a massive hug. And I also want to embrace my friends, and I want to shake hands at meetings wherever possible. I'm not suggesting that digital meetings are a 100% replacement. I like the physical networking. I think also it gives people an opportunity to dress up and go out, and that's all part of it as well. And I think that people, today I'm wearing a t-shirt, for example, that this would never normally happen. It's probably just because I was literally shaving bits of hair off myself, and I didn't want to do that with my suit on a minute ago. But there is a whole part of this communication that is missing. As I say, you can just see my hands now. But yes, that's my answer.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. What I'll do now is, if I open up questions from everybody else for the panel. So do I have any hands up? Was that Sue? Hi, Sue. You're just on mute, Sue. You're still on mute, Sue.
Okay.
That's better. We can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. I can take points from all sides on this. Computers have been fantastic during lockdown. They've kept people in touch, and we've been able to get on and do things. But I really miss being in contact with people. I would much sooner go down the street and talk to my friends than sit and talk to them over a computer. And again, as Paul was saying, it's body language. I mean, I speak a lot with my hands. I'm always waving. And again, you don't see that. It's the warmth of connection. That whole thing that makes us human rather than robots is missing over a computer. When you're sitting in a room with people, you get interaction all the time. If somebody says, "Oh, no, stop there," and God, you don't do that over a computer. We sit here at a meeting and we wait for somebody to finish before we come in. We're not interacting. And also, I think it was touched on, when you're on a computer, it is so easy to be offensive because you're not face to face with that person. People say things that they would never say if they were in the same room as somebody else. And there again, people don't say things because they're on computer rather than in a room with somebody else. I think we've got to be really careful in how we use this technology. Talking about doctors and nurses, I would sooner sit down with my doctor face to face or with my nurse. I do not like speaking to my doctor over the phone. That contact is missing. And also, your doctor or your nurse can't see what is being hidden. I mean, I've got a friend who's a doctor, and he says quite often it's not what people are saying, it's how they look and what they're doing and their body language that tells them there's something more that they're not saying. You lose that. You don't get it over a computer or over a phone. So that's what I'm just throwing out there, some different points.
Great, thanks, Sue. So I suppose where we perhaps come to with this is, what does this mean for us in terms of the self? So our role as individuals, but also as community, because it strikes me that what you're articulating there is very much about how you fit into community and your reliance on community. So for the panelists, where do we see this going? COVID probably, let's hope, won't be the driver of digital meetings in the future. But as we've already said, it's quite possible that a lot of organisations, a lot of sectors will choose to carry on with it. So, Andrew, where do you think we're going?
Okay, well, I can only really talk about the religious third sector. I don't really have much experience of other things, but certainly I think the skills I've learned over the last year, using this Zoom, for instance, will definitely be ones I won't put down. During Lent, I've started a Bible study group, for example, over Zoom. Many of the people who come to that are people who used to come to the physical in-person Bible study, but there's people who never came to that who are coming to the Zoom one. And it may be I'll take a vote on it in due course, but it may be that we stick with Zoom rather than going back to a physical one. There are things that it's very useful for, such as that. I can email out the notes for the Bible study. I don't have to print them off and waste the paper and the ink and all that sort of thing. So I can see that happening really well. I mean, I do have a background as before I was a priest, I was a lawyer, and I do have a background in that. And I always dreaded using the digital technology as a lawyer, and if we had to do video links, all that sort of thing, it always seemed to go wrong. But I think perhaps the law has now taken a big step forward in this area as well, and that we can save court time, we can save judges time, and costs by having video hearings now. That's another situation. I wouldn't want to do that where there were live witnesses very much, because I think it's important, like Sue was saying with the doctor, to be able to see a witness in court sometimes. But apart from that, I think there are some contexts where this could be very useful, notwithstanding all the criticisms I've made. Yeah.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I think you're right. Andrew, there's a point you mentioned earlier, which I think is a slightly different one, and I'm going to just address that as well, because we're in danger of disappearing down a rabbit hole, and that was, the impact that digital things are having on people, particularly young people. The fact of the matter is that if you take time out to go and look at what their games look like, they're absolutely amazing. And so one of the things you've got to understand is just how ridiculously cool these alternative worlds are that they live in. They make the normal world look utterly and totally dull and boring for a lot of the time for these people. It's not that they are having much more fun than we used to have on a dull Sunday afternoon. They are having the most exciting adventures in cyber worlds that make anything that we used to do when we were bored on a rainy Sunday look just devoid of adrenaline and excitement. We need to get this stuff in. So they are having a brilliant time, and chances are they're having a brilliant time with all their mates as well. And some of their mates will be on the other side of the world. But there was a massive misperception about just how exciting and engaging this stuff is. When you can wander around cyber worlds with your friends, and round the next corner could be any kind of weird beast or exciting challenge. Honestly, we need to experience it before we criticize it, because it's absolutely incredible. And I'm not suggesting that it's necessarily great for social interaction beyond that world, but they're really, as Vanessa was saying, they're very adept at communicating with each other on their own terms. They're having a great time, thanks. It's us that seems to have a problem, because we're outside of their world. They're having a brilliant time most of the time. So there is that. There was another point that I was going to make, but you know what, I just kind of ranted and gone off it. I'll have to come back. So what was, Andrew, remind me, sorry, I've remembered now. The other thing was that I think if you look at this positively, Andrew, it gives the opportunity of people like yourself to do an enormous amount of good in the world. You can speak to an enormous number of people and all of that time you might have spent traveling, or they might have spent traveling. You could actually speak beaming into troubled communities anywhere in the world and spreading your message. It's not, if we look at it as an opportunity, it's a great opportunity to spend more time with more people, and you can spread your word and help and assist people at scale that you could never do that before.
I have to say, I don't think technology will ever take over from meeting people. I'm desperate to go back to the office, I have to say. After being working from home for a year, I'm desperate to see people and hug people. As somebody who's an extrovert, I get lots of energy from people. It's not quite the same on a screen, but as Paul says, there are massive benefits. So some of the work that I do will be speaking to practice providers, academics all over the UK internationally, and whereas before I may have to spend a whole day traveling to London for an hour's meeting and then traveling back, which effectively takes a whole day by the time you've incorporated all the traveling. Actually, you can be much more productive because you can just drop in for a meeting. So I think from my perspective, from an academic perspective, we may find that actually conferences that we used to go to that may find more online because it's more cost effective, it's better for the environment, you don't have the same sort of carbon footprint. And so I think there will be those changes. I think there are huge possibilities for reaching people in different ways, but I personally don't think it will ever completely take over the human interaction, because I think at heart we're social beings. We're social beings that like to be with each other. Does that make sense? We like to see, we like to touch each other.
No, great, thanks, Vanessa. Can I come back to our other members? So any other questions? I'll just have to scroll through to see who's got their hand up. Gareth, sorry, I didn't get to you.
That's all right. Yes, fascinating. I guess the first comment to say is the digital world's not going away. If anything, it's advancing. And, you know, there are extremes on both sides of the benefits that the digital world can provide. Connectivity, as we said, reduction in environmental impact, even within my own staff, home working. At the moment, we've seen a significant reduction in travel, which will have a massive impact on our carbon footprint as an organisation, requiring staff to go in or not, and all that sort of thing. But I equally agree that we can't replace the face-to-face, but we can certainly complement it with a lot of use of digital media. I'll just throw a few examples in from youth work for you. So as Paul has mentioned, my kids indulge in a level of online adventures, for want of a better phrase, and they do it with their friends. And to a degree, it's no different from us when we were younger, disappearing into an online book, into a book, or disappearing into the fields and playing around. They are experiencing that. Now, there's a level of they don't get the physical activity, but likewise, they are experiencing a very real world joy to a degree with very real world friends. They're just doing it in a virtual environment where they are playing as some adventurer doing something. But likewise, the danger of that is there are examples of people that have died because they have spent too long online. I think the most famous one I remember was a Japanese kid that crawled to a local shop to try and buy some food and died on the way because he just spent too long in this virtual world and didn't actually survive. Terrible examples of where it can go wrong. So I guess my question for the panel is more of a how do we find the middle ground question, which is it's here and it is bringing great benefits. 1 in 9 relationships now are started online where the people don't actually meet and they result in successful marriages. So it's here and it is providing benefit to a lot of people and helping us with a lot of good that goes on. But it has the potential to be very bad. So how do we make sure that we find middle ground here, where we have to adapt the way we think as older people that aren't used to this world and encourage these young people into the interactions that we need them to have, but at the same time accepting that they have a world of experience that they are not going to let go of?
Thanks, Gareth. Who'd like to open up on that one? Paul?
Yeah, well, I think it is really interesting. There are, as you say, so many benefits to the way this technology is done. I'll just supplement what Gareth said with another couple of examples, if I may. I was chatting to a young man the other day, like we're doing now, and he was the son of one of my business friends, and he's ever such a bright boy. He really is. I shouldn't say boy, he's a man now. I've known him for a while. He's 19, 20 years old, and he's building a business creating apps, and he and I were having a discussion about him specializing in the charity sector, and what it is that he was finding ways for people who are carers to care for want of a better word, their flock, if you like. So, you know, whether they were people who were looking after young carers or people who were looking after addicts. And he was creating apps that meant people could ask for help and get it whenever they needed it. And so some of that is just wonderful. There are, you know, whether it's a recovering alcoholic or heroin user who's just, you know, his app that he created saved lives because it enabled somebody to say, I need help. And for somebody to have a conversation like we're having right now, one-on-one at the right time. And so you're right, there's an enormous amount of good and bad in all of this. You know, I look at the parks sometimes on a sunny day, and I wonder why there aren't the jumpers for goalposts and in the way it used to be when I was, and why young kids don't get out on their bikes and stuff like that. But I'm trying to project my childhood onto theirs, and like every generation, they just, I think, entirely different, and we're looking at it from our generational perspective and wondering why their world doesn't map onto ours. Well, because it's entirely different, and in many ways it's miles better what they're doing. Obviously, it'd be really healthy if they exercised more, and we didn't have the sort of perhaps some of those social problems that come from lack of exercise, which can be mental health too. Because obviously the mental health is so linked to physical health too. So yeah, you're right there. You're right there, Gareth. I mean, you know, but my parents read more books than I did, but do they take in more information than I do? No way. I'm connected to the internet and I'm absorbing information on a daily basis like a sponge at a phenomenal rate, because you know, I can have videos here, I can have white papers over there, people's opinions like we're doing here, and that's how you learn a lot, is from hearing other people's opinions. So yeah, it's different, and I think it's our mindset. We have to approach all of this positively and look for the good in it, because yeah, of course, there's always a dark side and there's a light side to everything, isn't there?
No, thanks.
The only
Paul.
thing I would add to that is it's actually have young people as our teachers. I have to say, if I want to learn any sort of new technology, we had a great thing with the university where the students came and taught the academics how to use, you know, it was Twitter. And so I had a young student come and spend, you know, an hour with me about setting up my Twitter feed, showing me how to use Twitter. I think they have massive skills that we could utilize in, you know, bridging that sort of generational technological divide.
Do we think that this generation is perhaps evolving an ethic of communication that perhaps we need to catch up with? Is there something going on that perhaps is almost out of our sight at the moment, but a way of conducting oneself in a digital space? And I'm thinking about the concept of our digital twin, for example. So we exist in the physical space, but we are starting to have this digital twin that's developing within cyberspace, because all of us have an identity now that exists in the cyber plane. So where do we think that's taking us?
I'm quite interested, Ben, in one of the things I want to do, because I'm consciously aware that as we, for example, get older and our health declines, our world can shrink because we may not be physically able to go and see the places we wanted to see. For me, I think the exciting thing about technology is, you know, you can get those headsets that give you the immersive. And I just think, how great would it be to be able to have some of those, to go around to care homes and somebody could go to Egypt and look at the tombs or climb the Himalayas. You know, I just think for people whose world's dividing, I'm quite excited about technology expanding their world.
Thank you. Andrew?
Well, I was really interested that Paul just then mentioned addiction, actually alcohol addiction, and the apps that can help with that. Because what entered my mind when Gareth was speaking just earlier on was actually when he was asking about where the middle ground is. Well, I thought the analogy of alcohol can be quite useful. There's a middle ground with alcohol. We can enjoy a drink, and God made wine to make glad the heart of man. But on the other hand, some people are teetotal and know they should never drink. They never touch it. And other people, well, it's also addictive. Alcohol can be addictive, and they can find that their lives are completely taken over by a need for alcohol. There's no other meaning to their lives in the end, for some people, very sadly. And I wonder if this might be an analogy for a middle ground of digital media use, that we can use it moderately and usefully on the one hand. There are some people who will know that it's not for them and never will be. And sadly, there'll be other people for whom it becomes addictive. And the very attractiveness of those digital virtual environments that Paul was talking about, these computer games, can be the thing that draws people into this addiction. Like that poor person who spent so much time on it that they ended up sadly losing their lives. And it's very rare, it's an unusual, it's an extreme example, but it shows that there is an addictive capacity for this.
Thank you, Paul.
Ability to share a screen with you. But on the subject of digital twins, can I show you something astonishing? If I'm allowed to share my screen with you, I want to show you something that will change your perspective about digital twins forever. And so if whoever's in charge, if you could enable me to share the screen with you, I promise what I show you will do your head in. So let's just have a quick look.
No, that's me screen sharing, isn't it? That's not, not working. Stop that. I think I can only enable myself to screen share.
Okay.
I don't think I can enable you. I'm so sorry. This is,
okay.
Or this probably, if my children were here, they would be able to do it.
Yeah, what I was going to show you is, and please go and look this up, right? Because it is astonishing. I promise you, it's astonishing. There's a company called Soul Machines, which is making animated humans, and they're so realistic that they these devices have to introduce themselves as being non-human, because some people will be fooled that they're human. They're built in a way that models the human brain, and what happens is you interact with them either in an environment which is a physical one where there's a camera on top of the screen, or you do it online. And what happens is these things can read up to 100 micro expressions on your face. They can also mirror 100 micro expressions. They're fed oxytocin and dopamine in digital form by creating eye contact with you and making you smile. They will have a conversation with you and they will build rapport with you, and they are so realistic you can see the pores in their skin, and they have even got a sense of humor. Soul Machines, go and look it up. What they're doing with these things is they have ideas that they will create these digital humans modeled on the human brain. Like I say, they'll behave like humans, they'll communicate like humans. They're animations, and what will happen is that we talk about, I didn't really understand the concept of a digital twin until these people who, by the way, work with Daimler and Mercedes and NatWest and ANZ, this isn't science fiction. When you go and look it up, it's happening now. And these people were starting to explore the concept of a digital twin. And what they were doing was they were talking to Mercedes about building a digital twin of, oh goodness, I've gone blank. Who is the world champion who's won it 7 times, who's English? Why have I complained? Why can't I remember his name? Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis Hamilton, so imagine building a digital twin of Lewis Hamilton and having him sell you your next Mercedes online. Do you think that might increase website online sales if you could interact with that? They're also talking about bringing back famous historical people and dead pop stars and modeling them and their voices and everything, and enabling you to have conversations with people who no longer exist, which is kind of weird. So the whole concept of digital twins, sorry, you touched on it, Ben, here. There is a great big digital can of digital worms there that is just, it's a whole new horizon, people. Go check it out.
Can I just say, I've put it in the chat. So if you open the chat up, it's like a little speech bubble at the bottom. You'll see that I've put the web link in so people can find.
Brilliant.
Digital twins. Ooh, there's a subject.
And as you say, there are a number of rabbit holes, aren't there, in this space? And I think that's what makes it so fascinating, I think, and gives us so much rich ground to talk about. So I'll just see if we've got any more questions in our last 10 minutes or so.
Just to say, forgive me jumping in, that I've managed to share a screen and to go on the link that you've just put in there, Vanessa, to give an example. There you are.
I find that quite frightening personally.
Yeah. I'll stop sharing that. Oh, yes. That's that's roughly what you were talking about, isn't it, I think?
I think there's a topic there for the future, Ian, for discussion.
I've stopped sharing. Yes, there is. Absolutely.
Any more? Hello, John.
Yeah. Ben, what I was going to say was, it seems to me that all human inventions can be used either for good or ill. That we used to think it was wonderful. You could telephone people the other side of the world. And yes, that's great. But now the telephone is used for so many wretched scam calls that it's a pain in the neck. It was wonderful when you could actually Skype or sort of have a phone call where you could see people, because that added a whole new possibility to it. Nuclear power is a wonderful invention, but it can be used for good or ill. The internet can be a wonderful machine to enable us to communicate with other people, but you also get online pornography, trolling, and all the other evil sides of it. Thinking of our Lord's temptations, it was so much of it was, how was he to use this wonderful power of his position for his own benefit or for the benefit of other people, for good or ill? All these inventions are wonderful in the freedoms that they give us, but we actually have to decide whether we're going to use them for good or ill.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much, John.
I have to
Folks,
say, John, that was an amazing summary of the discussion.
Which very neatly leads us to the last 5 minutes, and this hour has flown by. So could I just invite our three panelists to conclude with their closing thoughts, please? Shall I come to Paul first?
Yeah, by all means. And I think that, as I say, if there was one summary of all of this, is that, of course, technology can be used for good or bad. And if you wanted, the soul machines thing that I shared with you a moment ago, there was a perfect example of, it can be used for tremendous good. But on the other side of things, if you want to frighten yourself about what the technology we have today can do, look up something called slaughter bots on YouTube. It's absolutely the scariest thing you'll see this year, because all of the technology that it talks about exists. And so if you combine, for example, drones with AI, access to social media, and the sort of weaponization of those drones, what you've got is an ability for a drone to fly around, recognize somebody's face, be able to pick people out of a crowd. So maybe, people who have certain beliefs, who match certain social profiles, people who, believe a certain thing or have used a certain hashtag into their social communications, and annihilate them. And so, yes, all technology can be seriously, and AI, I mean, let's not even get onto AI, because AI is the ultimate ethics game. If you want to talk about where all of the technology goes, AI is where we end up, because AI has to be based ultimately on a set of ethics, and that's a really interesting conversation. So yeah, we are just scratching the surface of the technology for good or evil debate, because it can be used in such serious ways for both.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for your contributions. Andrew.
We're beings who live in space and time. We are sensual and physical beings, but we're created for God. All I want to say is beware withdrawal from the world of sense and space and time, because with that comes withdrawal from the spirit of awe and wonder at creation, at the physical world which exists around us, not because of anything we've done, not because we've created it with our cleverness, but because God has given it to us as a pure gift. And if we lose access to the spirit of awe and wonder, we risk losing access to the spiritual world completely.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And Vanessa.
I would say for me, I don't think that the digital world will ever replace the human world, but actually what digital technology enables some individuals is to remain in the human world despite maybe some challenges physically or mentally. And for me, I think that that's a good thing. It's about remaining connected with others, which fundamentally is the most important thing for me.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to all our panelists and to those who raised questions as well. And as always, we never know where we're going to end up with these discussions. They start in one place and we always end up somewhere else. So thank you very much for all your contributions. Thank you very much, Ian, for facilitating. And next week, we look forward to a discussion in relation to stop and search. So another topical and very emotive subject. So I'm sure that will stimulate some fascinating debate. So once again, thank you very much for everybody who's contributed today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.